G'day, welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Blum. Today's special guest is Corporal Chris May, and he's joined us today to talk about his military career and his tours to Afghanistan and his life now in Fire Rescue Victoria. Hi Chris, thanks for joining us on the show.
G'day Adam, thanks for having me.
Mate, it's an absolute honour and privilege to catch up with you, mate. I've been wanting to catch up with you for ages and it's really great to have you on. So, can you tell us about Chris May as a young fellow? What were you like at school and what were your hobbies?
So I grew up here in Melbourne's southeast suburbs. At primary school, I was a pretty solid kid, always playing footy in the yard during the day. And going through to high school, I kind of became a little bit of a rat bag. And as a younger fella, I actually wanted to join the Air Force. And I had aspirations on being a pilot once upon a time, but never actually got the academic grades required. And so I ended up kind of just plonking along around playing footy with my mates. Youngest of four boys, and now I'm the youngest. So three older brothers that kind of kept me in line as well. So it was a pretty good upbringing in Melbourne southeast. It wasn't too hard, but I didn't study very hard, and I kind of let it all come to me. So that kind of steered me to the direction that I took.
So you joined the Army in 2007 at 16 and 9 months. What was your main motivation to join at such a young age?
I actually, to be really honest, I just wanted to get out of high school. I hated high school. I had some bullies at high school, used to give me some grief. And as I was saying, I didn't get the grades that I wanted to be in the Air Force, and I ended up in a class where we did work experience, and my work experience that I chose was at a local Army Reserve unit where they had full-time staff working there. It was 3 Recovery Company. And one of the days I was doing work experience, we had to drive up to Puckapunyal. And I got to Puckapunyal and I saw all the armoured carriers going past, I saw the ASLAVs, I saw the Leopard tanks, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's all I had my focus on doing, was actually going off to go. And I said, yeah, how do I get into that job? I said, that's a full-time job, mate. That's where you got to go. So I ended up looking up on defence recruiting on the internet, and I had a look, and it said minimum age to join for a combat role was 18 years. But there was a way you could get in at 16 and 9 months. At 17 as the earliest was if you went through as an apprentice. So I actually joined originally and got the dotted line signed as an apprentice fitter armorer. And that's how I ended up at Kapooka. So I went to mum and dad and said, sign this, I want to join the army.
So for you, was there any previous military experience in your family, or were you the first to go through?
No, so both my grandpas on both sides, grandpa on my dad's side served in the Home Guard in England, and then he went into RAF and he served in the Air Force, and he finished his last kind of posting during the war in Canker Centuri in Ceylon in a mixed squadron of Australians, Canadians and British. And that's where he met the Canadians and Australians and thought they're pretty good blokes. And after the war, he went back and grabbed Grandma and said, we're moving to Australia. Canada's too cold. And on my mother's side, my Orpa and Orma, they were in occupied Holland during the war. And my Orpa was not conscripted into the Wehrmacht and ended up being part of the resistance. And then when the Operation Market Garden kind of collapsed and all the resistance fighters withdrew with the Americans and Allied troops, he ended up in Paris Island, becoming a Dutch Marine, and thinking he was going to go back to Europe, he ended up in the Philippines, Indonesia and the Philippines, fighting with the American Marines against the Japanese. He did the same thing. That's where he met some Australians, and after the war went back, grabbed his sweetheart and came to Australia. My dad nearly got conscripted for Vietnam, but, that was a bit of a contention at the time sort of stuff. And then one of my older brothers, Scott, he joined the army about 2 years before me. And when he walked into me and said, what are you going to do when you leave school? And I said, I'm going to go do this cool job where you get to drive like 8-wheeled armoured cars and that sort of stuff. And about 3 weeks later, he walks in and goes, I've joined the army doing that as an armoured crewman. And righto. So he joined the army about 2 years before me, yeah. So a little bit of family history in it. But
I was going to say some really rich military history there, and I guess your brother sort of stole your thunder in a sense, mate.
A little bit, yeah. But he kind of had his own reasons for joining sort of stuff, and I think given the period of time where we were both pretty young, it was all over the media, all over TV. You know, I remember the day September 11 happened. I was, you know, in grade 6, and I woke up in the morning to go watch cartoons, and there was no cartoons on because it was just repetition of that infamous footage, you know. And I suppose that kind of shaped a lot of the younger minds of that time, you know.
Well, mate, I'm similar age to you. I'm 30, and I remember that day too. I thought it was a movie. I honestly thought it was a movie, and I thought, oh, where's Cheese TV? Like,
That's what I was watching, Cheese TV.
Cheese TV.
Where's Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z?
Exactly right. And it was, mate, I suppose at the time, being so young, both of us, I don't think we ever thought that you know, we'll get to Afghanistan later on in, you know, when you served over there, but I don't ever think anyone thought that it'd be our longest war. That, you know, we you know, at the time it was, we knew that something had happened, like something bad, but yeah, looking back now in hindsight, I think that day changed the world. It didn't just, you know, everyone remembers where they were.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of my favourite things to do at work, where I work now, is actually ask people where they were on September 11, 2001, because a lot of people remember. And most of the guys at my work are in their like late 50s, early 60s, and they always go, oh, they were at work. And I was like, I'd just finished, like that night was our grade 6 play, and we did like a King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table play. And the next day we got off school. Because we stayed up late and done the school production. And then we got home, and that was when the first tower got hit. My brother comes running out, and that was Scott. That was the one who ends up joining the army. He runs out and goes, Mum, Dad, the Twin Towers have been hit by a plane. And we all went inside and kind of watched it for about 10 minutes of just this repetition of the plane hitting the building. And my dad just goes, this is the day the world changes. And how true that has rung. You know, there's been a lot of things that have changed from our childhood that you can't do now, and I don't think anyone at that point in time saw the eventuality of where the global war on terror and, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the global situation. You could never have picked it.
No, and well, for us, mate, and you know, I had a couple of other veterans on, and I asked them, they're in their 50s now, and they said, oh, and one of them brought it up. I remember the day JFK was shot, and for them, they've had, you know, number of things throughout their history. For us, it was, well, especially for us, it was World Trade Center, so September 11, the Bali bombings, the tsunami of 2004, you know, like all these major events, like, and, you know, I look at that and go, yeah, well, that's where you know, these are the memories that I have in my short 30 years, and it's like, it's very similar to you. You know, you're only a couple of years older than me, but you know it as well. These are the things of history that we've seen, and you know, like it's, yeah, as your dad was right, that day changed the world. And you know, so for you, what was basic training like, being so young, going to basic training, and how hard was it adjusting, and was it a shock for you? Was it in your face?
It wasn't in your face. I mean, I remember the bus rocking up to Kapuka. You're from Melbourne, you go through Melbourne, you go all the way up to Albury Wodonga, you go to the recruiting centre there, you pick up all the recruits there as well, and then you get to the bus at Kapuka, and you pull into ARTC, you see Blamey Barracks, you know, and you see the home of the soldier, and you drive up and you pull up, and this sergeant or a bombardier or a corporal gets on, and it's just like, from here you have 10 seconds to get off the bus. A completely unachievable task. Now I look at that and I go, that's hilarious. You know, I've been in that position myself. But at the time you're like, I'm never going to be able to do that. And from there it just snowballed really quick. The first few weeks was a massive culture shock. You know, you're up early, you're going to bed late. The amount of information being crammed into your head in that short period of time is crazy. The amount of weight you lose, you know, the amount of food you're increasingly eating, and you're just piling it on, and you just can't seem to hold on to any weight because you're moving all the time. And for a 16-year-old or early 17-year-old, it is quite confronting, because you've got people that are older than you who are performing at equal standards, but also in some aspects worse standards. I suppose it depends on how your self-discipline reflects and your ability to be competitive. Having grown up playing football and competitive sports, I'd always strive to achieve the very best. So when the corporal or the sergeant says you have to do it this way, I'm going, fine, no worries. That's what you told me to do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it as best as I can. And there are people that were a bit older than me that had a little bit more life experience, but seemingly couldn't grasp that simple concept because they knew better. So, here's a 17-year-old being told by my section command that I was going to be the 2IC of a section. And in my section, I had 2 blokes in their 40s and the rest of them were all in their 20s. And obviously there was some friction there because you got people that don't like being told what to do from a 17-year-old. I mean, it was a bit weird like that. And there was a couple of instances at Kapuka where it kind of, you were shook a little bit, but there was also some really funny stuff that you remember quite vividly. There's some pretty funny stories that come out of it, and that starts to build that basic level of camaraderie in the Defence Force. And it was very interesting as a 17-year-old. When I go around to schools and groups now and I talk about my military experience, they say, what would you recommend to someone looking at joining the Defence Force? And my only tip now is stay in school, finish year 12.
Yeah.
Because I wish I'd done that. Now, looking back at it all, I wish I'd stayed till year 12. I could have had so much more opportunities had I stayed till year 12. So for me, it was a very a eye-opening experience, but one that I wouldn't want someone else to go through because it closes the doors on so many things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good bit of advice, because, so many people go, nah, I hated school, I wanted to get out as soon as I could, and then they sometimes say the same thing, oh, wish I could go back and finish my HSC, or, and for me, I did that. I finished my HSC, and it just, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and, we're both in the same jobs now, like we're both firemen now, and it's funny because my HSC hasn't, it's good to have that bit of paper, but it actually, how I got the job was by the qualifications that I've got through volunteering and but yeah, I can see what you mean. And I think it's a really good point to say to any young person, look, all right, if school's not the be all and end all for people, like some people just hate school, they just want to get out. Totally fine with that. But if you can do those last 2 years, it can be really enjoyable. Like I loved the last 2 years of school. It was the best, and they're some of my fondest memories of school. Like you, when you said bullying, mate, I know exactly the same thing. And you and I have spoken off air, and you know my story, and a lot of people who listen to this know my story, struggle with mental health, and but yeah, no, I think it's really, really, it's a key point you touch on, that if you can stay at school and finish it. So your first posting afterwards was to Brisbane, and you were posted to C Squadron, 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment, where your brother was serving. What was that like for you, going to the posting where your brother was? How hard was that?
It was interesting because when we were at the end of our School of Armour posting, so you kind of go through your initial employment training, and towards the end of it, you put your preferences in as to where you want to go. And I was a Melbourne lad, and I said Brisbane, because we had 2 options, Darwin or Brisbane. And I said I want to go to Brisbane. One, because it's a 2-hour flight back home to see my family and friends. And when I finished my initial employment training, I was 18. And so I looked at it from a perspective of I didn't want to have to catch a flight from Darwin and be all the way travelling home to spend 8-9 hours at home and then to have to fly back. And the other guys were all from Brisbane, and they all wanted to kind of stay home. And I was like, if it's fair for me to move 2 hours away on a flight, maybe it's fair for you too. But they saw it a bit differently. So there's a bit of argument going on there about postings. And I ended up getting posted to Brisbane. And my brother at the time was serving on Sector 11 in Iraq. And I rocked up to the unit, and I walked up and down the hangars, and all the vehicles were parked up there. And I don't know what I was doing. I think I was singing a song or something, and I was just humming to myself. And someone heard me, and they stuck their head, went, "Oi, Maisie." And I went, "Yep." I turned my head around, and they stuck their head out of the turret, and they went, "You're not Maisie." And I was like, "Yeah, I am." Because my brother was there. Anyway, that's how I started that friendship. And I was like, "No, I'm Chris. I'm the younger brother." And, that was really interesting. It was good for the first bit. And then I got the nickname Shadow because apparently I was following my brother's footsteps. And whilst he was serving, he came back and ended up doing a second tour almost back-to-back to go to Afghanistan. So I ended up staying in Brisbane. And originally we were both put down on the same trip to go overseas, but the the hierarchy at the time said, no, we're not sending two brothers overseas, because I think everyone's familiar with the, sending family off to war sort of scenarios that have happened in our past. Though it was unlikely, it's still not a risk that some commanding officers and that want to take. And my brother being more highly qualified than I was, he was put on the list, and I was told to stay at home and train in Australia. So I ended up staying in Australia while he deployed on his second trip. So together, we actually really only served in the unit together for a very short period of time physically, but we were in the same unit, in the same squadron. I was in 3 troop and he was in 1 troop, so it was good.
And for you, like, your first deployment was in 2009 to Afghanistan. So you were posted to B Squadron. So you had your first initial in Brisbane, and then you were posted to 3-4 Cav in Townsville, and you were deployed on the Mentoring and Reconstruction Task Force 2 with 1 RAR. What was that like for you with your first deployment to Afghanistan? Like, you'd seen so much, you'd read, your brother had served over there. Yeah. What were like the pre-deployment training and everything? What was that like for you, and what were your first thoughts of I'm now, because how old were you when you were on your first trip? My first trip, when I landed in country, I was 19.
So I, the old saying, I was only 19 sort of thing kind of rung true a little bit. But I put my hand up to go to B Squadron, 3rd, 4th Cavalry Regiment in Townsville, mostly because I wanted to kind of forge my own path and my own name in the Corps. Armoured Corps is very small, and being nicknamed Shadow for a bit kind of got to me a little bit, to be honest. And it was nice when they came in, they walked in and said, we need volunteers to go to Townsville. And Armoured Corps at the time was one of the most highly deployed corps in the, at the time, behind Special Forces, because we were supporting every single operation. So the infantry regiments were rotating around. There was always a supporting armour element, which meant it was either 2 Cav Regiment or 2nd 14th Light Horse, and B Squadron, which had the PMVs, were just supporting both of them. They were either doing Iraq or they were doing Afghanistan. They were doing Iraq or Afghanistan. It just kept yo-yoing for them. And so I put my hand up and said, I'll go to Townsville, kind of forge my own destiny in the Corps. And I landed in Townsville, got off the plane, got to the barracks, was knocked on the door, and when mate opened the door up and he had a bottle of rum, and he said, come and meet the lads. And we started work on Monday, and during our mandatory briefing for the year, which is all the don't drink drive, don't do this, don't do that, here's the heat stress video, the OPSO walks in and goes, righto, listen up, everyone whose name I read out, you're all got to go report down to Bravo Company 1 RAR, you're all getting deployed as part of the surge. My name was on that. And then within the end of that week, we were started to parade down at the 1st Battalion, and we were attached to Bravo Company. And the training was intense. You were straight into it. It was, we have a finite period of time to do training to prepare you for an operation which is 5 years into it, 6 years into it. We've been there since 2001 with Special Forces, and the RTF kind of rotations began in 2005, and this is 2009. So we're kind of looking at, we've only been here for 4 years. We're still figuring it out, but we're also making changes because we've gone from being a reconstruction task force to a mentoring and reconstruction task force. So we had 2 roles, and the training was go, go, go. It was just straight into it. There was casualty training. There was all the IED, theatre-specific training. Then there was the CERDEX, where we had to go out and get certified that we were good enough to do what we were required to as Australian soldiers. And from there we flew into Kuwait, because we were still working out of Kuwait at the time. Went to Ali El Salim Air Base, got on a C-130, flew around the corner. Next thing you know, we're corkscrewing into Tarin Kot. It's nighttime, and it was a surreal experience stepping off the back ramp of that plane to stand in the heat and that dry air, the dusty air that just kind of, you could taste it in your mouth, and to breathe it in, and you kind of like, I'm here, And that was the first moment you kind of went, crap, I'm in a war zone, as a 19-year-old, the consequences of where I am is quite serious now. This is a life and death sort of situation. Obviously, you've got to go through the RSO and I of landing in country, and then you go on a nursery patrol with the outgoing soldiers. So the handover takeover time is extensive to build that familiarity and comfort. But you know, that moment of stepping off the plane is only matched by the first time you go outside the wire. So as you drive outside of the perimeter and you open your machine guns, or you bring the weapons to action, apply the safety catch, and then it's like it's go time. You know, like from here on out, bullets will go out and they will come back. The ground will explode. Rockets will fly either way. It's a combat zone, and there is combat going on and has been. And you know, when I was going back 2 years, when I was at the School of Armour, Poppy Pearce was killed. And he was our first casualty amongst a list that grew over that time. 2009, only 2 years later, and we're in the same theatre of operations. You know, at that point in time, Poppy's vehicle was still on base. It was still kept on base, sort of thing. So, as Armoured Corps soldiers, we were told, do you guys want to go see the severity of the impact of what sort of things can happen to it? And they said, because if you want to see the vehicle, we can show you, but fair warning, it's not nice, and it will give you a greater impression of the severity of these devices that the Taliban are using. And it was, I went down and had a look. I didn't climb inside the vehicle. I just, from the external, had a look at it, and I just went, wow, like that is crazy. But that's it, you know, that moment you're out the wire, it's go time. And it was crazy.
So for you, and you know, like for your family being, you know, your brother had gone over, and what was your parents' first thought when you said, "Hey, I'm deploying, I'm going to Afghanistan"? And
to be honest, I never actually asked. And to be really honest, I didn't really care, because this was me doing something that I wanted to do. You know, I don't think you ever join the military with an aspect of, I'm going to bother myself with what mum and dad think about it, because at the end of the day, like any of our soldiers that have come before us, you know, most of them didn't tell their parents they were signing up until that night at dinner, sort of thing, and they went off in their great adventure. I think for most part of it, the similarity in thinking, I thought I was going on my great adventure as well. And I suppose for most part, it was the start of my great adventure. But I didn't really take that into account, into my parents and my other brothers' feelings to us going off to war, until I was 26, 27 years. So it took me a couple of years to figure it out, that actually just going home and telling mum and dad, or ringing them up and saying, hey, I'm going on a trip, I was excited, but mum and dad's heart must have sunk to the bottom of the ground. You know, soldiers, sailors and airmen and women, they're voluntarily excited to go to do their job, but the implications of that is that people begin to worry about you. And I, you know, good question, because I never had actually really thought about it or contemplated it, to be honest.
So when you're over there, because you know you mentioned that the IED threat was there, was it starting to ramp up a lot in 2009, or had it come in earlier than that?
We saw a very theatre-specific IED threat that was developing. The IED threat that was in Iraq versus Afghanistan were two different. You know, I think Iraq was steeped in a lot more technological IEDs using RFID technology and radio communications, whereas those IEDs, they were kind of very mostly remote. They were kind of command pool IEDs. They were not many that were using telephones. They were being found in country, but not at the same level of those in Iraq, whereas I think that's mostly because Iraq had a lot more education, accessibility to the internet, you know, kind of smarter people doing the making the IEDs, whereas Afghanistan was very much, it was like stepping back into the 4th century. It was crazy. Like, you know, you're not seeing this infrastructure you saw in Kuwait that was like modern. You're seeing mud huts that are built with mud, with smashed bottles on the top to stop people from climbing over them, and people wearing traditional robes and garments that, you know, I don't think have changed in 1,000 years. It was very weird, you know, to see that. And I think the IED technology and threat were very, very different. But in saying that, they were developing. They was getting better, you know. They were, every IED that we found, they were observing that. the Taliban were watching that, and where they had the time to watch that, they would then adapt that to change it. And, between my first tour and second tour, which was only 2 years apart, the technology was vastly different. So I suppose, it was ramping up. We were there during the elections, and we essentially were a security detachment for the elections that were held in Afghanistan in 2009. We thought that was going to be, hell for leather. Turns out it wasn't, because probably I think it was mostly rigged. Who knows? But yeah, it was, it was quiet for the most part. For that trip that I was there on MRTF2, it was relatively quiet. We know the SOTG guys and the Special Operations members did some amazing work during that period, but our real kind of kinetic operations was, for the lack of a better word, I suppose, pretty benign.
So, did you have much interaction with the locals, and were they? What were they like towards you? Were they friendly, or how did they see the contingent of forces being over there in their country?
Yeah, the Afghani people are a funny one. You've heard of the Pashtunwali code. They will give you the clothes off their back if it meant they could help. And I suppose people always say to me, they go, "Oh, you went to Afghanistan. They must have been horrible people over there." That's not true. It's a beautiful country with some of the most beautiful landscapes and some of the most beautiful people, with just like 10% of rat bags that are ruining it for everyone. And they're just trying to survive. That's their life. Their day-to-day life is surviving. And we interacted with a lot of, young adults and kids, and through interpreters, you have a conversation with them. But I remember a very poignant moment in my life was when we were in a hide on top of a hill supporting the infantry in an overwatch position, and they were doing their patrol, and these two young boys, probably I suppose 6 and 4, I estimate, walked out of their little mud hut, the koala, and they walked up, and we didn't know what to do. Like, you don't pull your pistol out on like a kid. What do you do? Get back. And I remember that we were given colouring books by the NATO or ISAF, PR thing. It was give the kids colouring books, give them something to do. And these kids came up, and we had a chat to them through an interpreter, and found out that they were just kids, that their dad was a farmer and whatnot. And we ended up giving them these colouring books, and had a little kind of chat with them. And then the next morning, the father walked up and told us that the Taliban had come in at the night time and murdered them, because they had spoken to us, and because they had been observed speaking to the Australian forces. So I suppose that was like, for me, we ended up helping kind of address the bodies and that sort of stuff. And it was a weird moment, right? Because I was still 19, and I was like, is this... Because like I was saying before, we didn't really have that much in the way of like kinetic combat. But was this what war was? Like, was war kids having, being murdered innocent kids being murdered in the nighttime? Was this what we were here for, or did we miss something? Were we supposed to try and stop that? It was really weird for me. I was 19 years old, and I didn't really know how to take it. That was a very interesting moment. But for the lack of that, every interaction I ever had with an Afghan after that, I treated him with as much respect as I could. I tried to make him laugh. I tried to make him smile. I didn't speak much in the way of Pashtun, so I really didn't know how to interact with them, apart from asking the basic questions like, what's your name? What's your dad's name? Where do you live? Because those were questions we had to ask. But you try and talk to them through hand gestures, and sometimes you get a smile out of them, and they're very, very nice people. But yeah, it's just the rat bags, I suppose.
So, and I look at, and you've just told me that story, and looking back then, as you said, you didn't know how to feel then. Looking back now, and now that you're a little bit older, and what you've been through, how do you look at it now? Looking at what happened to those young two boys that were murdered.
Yeah, like that's a really interesting question. I suppose from a perspective of where I'm sitting right now, I'm here in a relatively comfortable life, and I've got my amazing wife, and my life's pretty good now. And those lives were cut short, and it's really hard because with what happened in Afghanistan over the last 12, 18 months, you start to look at it and you're like, you know, very hard to watch. Did those kids die in vain? Who knows? I try not to, overload myself with that sort of information, but you have to think about it, That was probably some of the key stuff that I did start to consider when I saw it. And I saw a comment that was made by a Taliban spokesperson that said they had the technology to make the watch, but we had the time. And that just blew my head away. Like, I was like, oh man, that's so right. Like, all they had to do was wait. And they did, it was the longest war we've been involved in. But that moment in time, I never thought that would change my life, sort of thing. And then coming forward to where we stand now, I sit there and I won't forget that memory. And there's many soldiers that have had interactions like that with a local fellow soldier, someone in the similar circumstances to them in their careers of the military. They will never forget that moment in time, but it does make you think, and it can bring on some pretty, it can bring on some pretty dark memories. But for the most part, it's a good question.
And I thought, because I thought it was a good one to ask because when you were 19, your outlook on life is very different to you're 33 this year, so. And you've got all the life experience that you've had, since you were 19. And you do look at things very... I know, I'm just telling you that I'm just about to finish my book, and I said it to my friends today that there's a few things that have come out of the book that I'm really grateful that I have written it, because it's made me stop and actually think of things that I looked back on that when I looked at it back when I was younger, especially with my father, and I questioned it. Now I see everything he did for me was just, and same as you, look, life is a wonderful thing, and experiences, you look back on things and go, ooh, yeah, maybe I could have handled that a little bit different, or, so.
Yeah, massively. And it's the other thing too, I suppose you wouldn't be the same person you are now unless you'd lived that moment in time, because every moment you've lived up until now has made you the person you are.
That's right.
And whether or not you're a good person or a bad person, these are all the choices you had in life. So I always try and remember my, sometimes I don't make the right decisions, I know that, but I try and do everything I can to be a good role model and whatnot, and use my great journey or my experiences to kind of push me to do things to help others and whatnot as well. I suppose it's almost that karmic cycle we were talking about,
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the highlights from your first trip?
I suppose some of the highlights from my first trip, one of the best ones was coming home, actually. I think it's when we were there, so we were actually due to fly out towards the end of the year. I think it was January. I think we'd been there for Christmas. And we were due to fly home, and we got snowed in. Tarancot at that point in time had a dirt runway, and the C-130s couldn't land there because there was excessive amount of snow, and it just turns to slush. Everyone's seen what the side of a road's like in the snow. It just gets to mush. That was the airstrip, and every day we were trying to fly out. We ended up walking down to the ramp, and there'd be this Air Force sergeant. He's like, "Yeah, no flights today, lads," and everyone just kind of head just dropped. It was just the worst feeling. I felt worse for my mates that had kids in that back home and wives and partners. I was a single 19-year-old. I didn't give an absolute hoot. As far as I was concerned, I was getting paid to be there. So yeah, I was like, sweet, cheering.
I'll take the money.
Yeah, absolutely. But it got to a point where it started to really get on your head. Like, you're going, I just want to go home, right? Like, I'm sick of, I either want to go back out on patrol and do my job, or I want to go home. I don't want to be sitting in this weird limbo phase hanging on base. I just feel like a wasted resource, And we got on the plane, and I remember getting on the plane, and it was just turning back the first time, going back to that first moment, stepping off the ramp, stepping onto the ramp and turning back and having a look at the mountain. And from a nighttime in summer, it's like dusty as all hell. It's like there's a haze in the sky. But in winter, all that snow and moisture pushes all that dust to the ground, and it is just the most crisp landscape you'll ever see with snow-capped mountains. Beautiful landscape in the TK Bowl and most of Afghanistan. And I just remember turning back and looking at it, and I went, I kind of hope to see you again, but I also don't. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then we got back, did our demounting through, this time we were demounting through the UAE at Al Minhad. And then we got on a plane and the strategic flight, and we flew back to Australia. And as we were flying back, we were talking to the air staff, the air hosties and that, and they were really good. And we were in our uniforms, we had our Jelly Bean Desert Cam uniform on, and we were going to get off the airport, and family would be there, and they'd go give you a big hug and whatnot. And on the way as we were coming into land, the pilot dimmed all the lights out, and they started playing My Island Home by, what's it, Christine Anu, I think it was? Yeah. They started playing that, and you're just like, this is home, this is my home. This is the place that I left to go be a part of my great journey, and to come home was just the most fantastic experience, and to see families reuniting, fathers and mothers with their children, and spouses, wives and husbands just embracing each other. That was probably one of the most fond memories I have, was that moment of joy. That was amazing. But aside from that, I used to do some pretty dumb things to try and cheer the lads up. I think one of my other memories was I ended up finding a hockey stick on a trip to Kandahar, and there's a photo of me. I've got, and I'm holding a hockey stick on the only sealed road between Tarankat and Kandahar, and I'm standing there with a hockey stick, and someone walks out and goes, "Where'd you get a hockey stick from?" And I just went, "Don't worry about it." I managed to get it from a Canadian fellow that I met in Kandahar who was playing speedball in the boardwalk, and he gave me a hockey stick, and I ended up keeping it.
So when you were over there, did you, in that first tour, did you guys lose anyone while you were in country?
Yeah, so the 1st Battalion lost Ben Ronaldo when we were there. So that was a tough time, when we lost Ben. I'd known Ben through passing and chatting to him, but apart from that, I wasn't really close to him. However, there was a guy that was in my vehicle that was extremely close to him, and that the day that we, obviously when someone gets killed in action, the comms blacks out and there's no talking or communicating back to Australia until the family and next of kin have been notified. And we find out after that sometime, there's a lot of information kept, and they kind of tell the right people because the chain of command knows who knows people, right? And the bloke in the back of the vehicle, one of the guys in our PMV, was really good friends with him. And when he got told, just the level of just sheer devastation in his eyes, and the amount of the tears just coming from his face, and you knew that this was the pointy end of war. This was the reality. And a lot of us were working that day. We all heard it on the radio. So we had one guy who was a Pri Alpha, so Paul Warren. He lost his leg below the knee, and that was operation was. It's just, unlucky. It was just, it's just unlucky. Fred Smith wrote a song about it, The Dust of Uruzgan, which tells the story of Ben Ronaldo and Paul Warren, more so Paul Warren's story. But that song is one that I regularly listen to in my car on the way home from work or something, and I just kind of remember it all. And, like I was saying before, you remember that dust, you remember how it tastes, you remember how it feels. But you remember that day, like I remember that day as well, and a lot of us do. And the ramp ceremony, so that final farewell where we line the from the hangar down to the airstrip, and the coffin's loaded up onto a C-130 and it takes off, and that's something you don't forget, whether they're Australian or Dutch or American. You never forget the ramp ceremonies, because they were just the moments in time where your brain goes, you are in a war zone. It's all fun and games until it's not.
Yeah, it's not a video game, like,
No, yeah. And there was there's a really funny photo getting around of kind of stuff to remind you sometimes. And there's a photo getting around of a couple of lads standing at the base, and there was a halo on the back of a target. There was a halo thing that says no respawns past this point. And I suppose that was a really weird thing to do, but it was kind of humorous, but it was kind of a reminder.
Yeah, this shit's real, like,
Yeah, like it's kind of, you make silly decisions. You end up, you can that could happen. But what happened to Ben and Paul was just completely wrong place, wrong time, you know. But yeah, that was our casualty, and we also had some Dutch that were killed, and we did a couple of ramp ceremonies for the Dutch that were killed in country.
I remember, and one of our good friends, Carly Box, I had her on the podcast, and she was on watch that day, and she said it in her podcast that she blamed herself for Ben's death, and I said, and it was for her. She said it was really hard for her to go to that. You know, she remembers it as well as you do, and yeah, and I said to her, Carly, there was nothing more you could have done that day. It's time to let that go. And she said, yeah, you're right. Like and she was, I could see it in her. Like I could see it, Chris, that she was, it still affects her to this day. And you know, like any loss of any soldiers, you know, and as she said, she didn't know him, but you know, you're still a team, and you've lost a team member. It's you know, whether you know the person or not, they're part of the team. And I guess for you, after losing Ben and the couple of Dutch, coming back to Australia, when you got back to Australia, did you feel that you'd changed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I hated everyone. I hated the world. It was weird. It was really weird, like coming home and hearing people talk about the price of milk, the price of butter, just the small, stupid things. And they would just get so angry about it. And you're like, man, not a few months ago, I saw a young fella my age get put on a plane after dying in a country so far away from home. And you're concerned about the price of milk. Like, get a grip. I don't think that's a feeling any soldier has not ever felt. I think everyone kind of does it. I suppose it's because you kind of seen the reality of the world. That is the world. People say, oh, but you're in your own little bubble. Yeah, you are. This is your bubble's your town, your suburb, your state, your country. You know, your hemisphere is your bubble. And each of those steps, once you go a little bit further out, you realize there are other problems in the world. And, you know, people that have been, even just backpackers that have backpacked to Europe and caught one of those buses and got drunk for 2 weeks through Europe versus backpackers that have gone to third world countries in Europe and gone to like Africa. You see two different sides of humanity and global issues. And, you know, my wife, she went and worked, she's a NICU nurse, and she went to Africa and helped sick babies. But they don't have the medical care that they have. And she comes back with a very different view of, you know, issues they have in their hospital versus where she was, you know, volunteering over in Africa. And, you know, people at work go, oh, these working conditions are horrible. And she said the same thing. You don't know until you don't know, until you know the reality of it. So I changed massively, man. I had my 20th birthday in Afghanistan. We were rocketed the night that in Tarin Kowt we were rocketed. So I had my 20th birthday was a fruit cake in a hangar. And then I flew home early, I think it was January, we flew home. And I remember being on leave and I said to my dad, why is everyone so bloody stupid? What is their problems? Why are they so sooky about like fuel prices? And he just said it very kind of plainly. He goes, no one cares about what's happening on the other side of the world. They care about what's happening here and to them. They don't know about anything that's happened in Afghanistan. The only reason we know is because we've been tracking it because you were there and Scott's been there. They don't care.
So for you, looking at what your dad said, and it's really cut straight to the point. For you, did you sort of, like, looking back now, did you look at that and go, did you question your service and why you're over there, or did you question, like, was it something that you'd look at and go, well, people should care, like, you know, we're risking our lives over there. Are we, you know, or did you just go, oh, okay, I'll just get on with it?
I think I just got on with it. I think it became more of a personal thing and kind of threw a log on the fire. I think I became more aggressive in my my passion and desire to be a good soldier because, you know, wars are won by soldiers, not by sitting around doing nothing. And I suppose in my brain, still being pretty young, you know, male brains don't develop till they're 25 plus. You know, I was only 20 years old, so I'm sitting here going, you know, I can change the world. I kind of thought about it. I want to go, I wanted to train and do special forces, and I wanted to try and become that, the tip of the proverbial spear, and I wanted to kind of be the thing that was involved in that direct action against the Taliban to, end the war, I suppose. It was a very weird, it was a fuel on the fire moment. It wasn't a questioning why I'm doing what I did. I think if I'd gone down that path, I wouldn't have stayed in the army. But I think there are a few blokes that thought that, and they kind of ended their service after those trips. But no, it kind of poured fuel on the fire for me, and I ended up going in and I started training and did a few promotion courses, and I was building myself up for something bigger. I just wanted to wait to get that life experience, and that's where I ended up, doing my second tour. So
yeah, well, I was just about to mention, so you did some promotional courses, and then in 2011 you were still in 3-4, and this time you go back to Afghanistan with the Mentoring Task Force 3 as part of 2RAR battle group. What for you this time around? Were you better prepared because you'd done a tour over there in 2009? Were you mentally better prepared for this second trip than you were on your first trip?
I think I was mentally more complacent, but physically more prepared. I think I knew what I was getting into. I think I was excited at the prospect of getting off the plane and seeing the landscape again. I was apprehensive of the threat. I know from what our training had involved, we actually did have some intel coming back saying that they were getting a bit more sneaky with their IEDs and we needed to be on our toes. We did have the 2nd Battalion they'd come off their East Timor rotation, so they were very young, passionate infantry soldiers that were keen to get over there. And our platoon sergeant, Justin Huggett, he'd served in Afghanistan with the Grenadier Guards, and he was kind of telling us, he was getting them all G'd up, Huggo was always saying, this is the reality, guys. Like, you go over there, it is do or die. It's not this peacekeeping stuff we're doing in East Timor. This is, traditional infantry operations, sort of, so to speak. And we were kind of, most of the guys in the armoured asset had done 1 or 2 trips to Iraq or Afghanistan. So they were kind of like, yeah, a little bit, but also tone it back a bit. We were kind of battling it out. We did have a few guys in our unit that hadn't deployed yet, so we were kind of giving them the heads up and saying, hey, it's going to be, we don't know what it's going to be. It's very hard to predict what was going to be like, but I think personally I was mentally a bit complacent, physically more prepared, but this time I wasn't just a bum on a seat. I was also a junior leader, and I was in charge of looking after soldiers as well, so I had a bit more responsibility, and I think that was something that I kind of locked away in the back of my head that, yeah.
So were you, on your second trip, were you 21, 22? How
21 years old.
Yeah, right. So as you're saying, you're a junior leader. Like, that's, mate, I look at that, and 21 having blokes under you, like that's, and at that stage you'd been in a few years, hadn't you? So you were sort of looked up to by some of the younger digs. They were looking up to you. And explain that to me. What was that like? Were you thriving at having that leadership and being in that role and wanting to lead these young digs? To explain that to me.
So I'm someone who I really embellish, even on the footy field or competition. So I embellish leadership. I think it's something that I think I've got the ability to lead. Not to blow smoke up my own ass, but I've seen a lot of good leaders, and I've seen a lot of bad leaders, and I've seen people that have kind of mentored me through my military career that have been excellent leaders, and leaders that speak out for right and wrong, and they will put their name on the line for what is right. And I personally kind of, when I was promoted, my OC at the time, kind of shook my hand and he said, now you're a leader, you got to be a leader, and I was like, oh, what the hell does that mean, man? Like, good on you. But yeah, he was right, bang on the money. And I had that same issue I kind of had at Kapuka. I was 21 years old, but I had soldiers. My driver was older than me. Most of the guys in the section were older than me. And some of the infantry guys were older than me, and here's me, and I'm walking around. I'm like, no, don't do that. it was really a weird time, but I really liked it. I still enjoy mentoring other people. I still enjoy leadership roles, and I think it's one that kind of comes back to the basis from that day I was promoted in 2010, that saw me as a leader on my second tour. That's made me the leader I am today. And if I can lead, inspire, motivate through all that experience, then I've done the right thing. And I really kind of grasp the opportunity of leadership with both hands, because you have to.
So what had changed in country from 2009 to your second deployment? Had the country gone forward, or had it stayed the same?
Gone forward, man. It was really cool. It was really interesting. My brother deployed in 2008. He went to Afghanistan. 2009, I went to Afghanistan. 2011, I went to Afghanistan. And when I speak and show my photos, or when Scott shows his photos of Afghanistan, of the people, to when I showed them from my first trip to my second trip, there is progression. There was on my second trip, there were sealed roads. What took us 2 or 3 days on my first trip to get to a certain location, you get there in 35 minutes. It was unbelievable. It was crazy. It was the sheer civil infrastructure that was built to kind of really bring the whole TK bowl together was unreal. But at the same token, the threat had changed, the enemy had changed, the operating areas where we were working had all changed. Whereas I spoke to guys that were in Afghanistan in 2007, when I joined the army. They were on this trip with me, and they said, this is as far as we got. In 6.5 months of fighting, this is as far as we got. And I'm like, you can still see the base, mate. The base is just over there. And he goes, yeah, this is how bad the fighting was. And we were doing 20, 30 Ks. We were going out to the base of mountains that the special forces were working at. We were getting refueled by helicopters pushing bladders out. Like, the change in operations was unbelievable. But now we had changed from that reconstruction. So, it used to be RTF, then it went MRTF, and then it became an MTF before it came the Australian Task Force. We were now mentoring Afghan soldiers to take this responsibility on themselves. And so our scope of operations changed majorly. And we were working more autonomously in each of the valleys as independent companies under that battle group. And some of the actions we were doing were traditional infantry actions. They were going out to seize and hold ground against the Taliban with their infantry counterparts. So, I've got some really good photos of some infantry guys going out, and I don't think you would have seen, apart from like special forces dudes putting their cam cream on, we had our blokes doing that. They were going out and they were actively seeking the Taliban.
So for you, you're over there, and from the first trip to the second trip, you had what was a day-to-day like from the first trip to the second trip on when you're out on patrol? And so what was it? Was it different?
Yeah, massively. So on my first trip, we were all kind of based out of the Tarin multinational base. So MNBTK, multinational base. Tarin was where we worked out of. And we would go out and do patrols into the valleys. And we had what was called patrol bases. And the patrol bases were small areas where the Afghan National Army was being mentored. When I was on my second tour, we were embedded in those patrol bases with the Afghan National Army. And right before we landed in country, we had an insider attack, green on blue, at Combat Outpost Mashar, which was the valley that we'd flown into. So we'd flown into that valley, and our company took over that base. So tensions were high. But a day-to-day life in the patrol bases was, we always had pickets. So there was always someone up on the tower on the machine guns. We had a rear picket, a front picket. We had the NCOs patrolling around, making sure that the Afghans weren't opening the gates, so to speak, and all that sort of stuff. So we actually it was like a routine, whereas back in the big base, the FOB in TK, another country's personnel were doing the security of the base. So once you're in there, it was like, man, you can go have a hot shower, you can do whatever you want, life is go to the gym, whatever. Where we were in the patrol bases, every now and then a rocket flies over and, it's like, get your gear on, we're going, they're coming to assault us. So, yeah, it was a very different lifestyle on the second trip, much more exciting for a young fella who wants to be there. It's much more kind of what you want to do. But we were still doing patrols out of that base, which meant that we had to leave some of our guys behind, and they'd have to ramp up the security while we were out, and we'd go further than we did on the first trip because we were already in that, we're in nodes. We had the ability to reach out a lot further. So some of the operations that the infantry guys more so, but we also got to do with them were pretty cool. But in saying that, the IED threat was a lot higher because we were operating in areas that the Taliban had a lot more eyes on. So,
Well, I was just about to mention a day that you remember and stays with you every day. September 23rd, 2011 was a day that you'll never forget. Can you share with us the lead up to that fateful day and what happened?
Yep, so 23rd September 2011. So we it was actually really interesting. We were in a defensive position around a newly built base that we were trying to build on this, or a police base on top of a hill. So we had the engineers out there sighting out some HESCOs. We had Chinooks dropping off stores, equipments and shipping containers by air so that we could build this police base in this valley. And whilst we were in the security, it's a pretty relaxed position. The mortars and the support by fire position was on the other side of the valley, and we had one of their engineers. Pup had his birthday, so I cooked him some noodles in some wraps that I made. I was the master chef of the engineer car. Being a lead vehicle, I was responsible for the engineers. And so Pup had his birthday. I think it was his 20. I think it was his 19th birthday. So it was his 19th birthday that I made him a cake for, some like little wraps for. And we'd received orders to take the female engagement team up to a small village about 8 or 9k to the north of this valley, and the young child had like bronchitis or something going on with the respiratory system. So they wanted to take the female engagement team up there. They wanted to conduct first aid and medical assessment, and then backload this young girl to provide medical aid. It was what they refer to as a hearts and minds mission. You go out there and you help the local nationals. They sympathise with you, get a bit of information out of them, lots of stuff. Find out where the bad dudes are. We started the patrol pretty early, and we started moving up the base. I was a lead vehicle. The engineers got out. We searched. We found an IED pretty early on. EOD went out, blew that one up. Get back in the vehicles, keep moving. And we'd gone about 3.5 hours. We'd been out kind of just on this patrol. We weren't moving very quickly. It was very slow going. And we got to this point where the ICOM chatter was being picked up. So essentially what they were doing with, the SIGs we had attached to us could listen into the Taliban communications, and we had interpreters that were kind of interpreting what they were saying that gave us a situational awareness about what was happening. And that started to ramp up a bit. So they started reporting to us, hey guys, this is what's going on. There are people watching us. So we kind of obviously, without looking obvious, you start looking at it a little bit more, trying to find out where they're talking from and whatnot. And we come across this culvert, and this culvert was like, if there was like the Idiot's Guide to Laying IEDs, this would be the front cover of this book, right? And we pulled up, and the engineer at the time was Jonesy. He goes, we'll search this one. And I said, yeah, no worries, mate. And I jumped on the radio, and I asked permission to kind of bypass it. I didn't realise that I'd set it on the wrong radio net, and I kind of got a little bit of a rocket from the top. Said, hey, no, we told you to go down this road. No worries. All right. Jonesy kind of rolled his eyes at me, and I said, mate, take your time. It's not worth it. Just take your time. And I said, I'm going to hang back out up here. Because normally what would happen was I would roll with them and stay close to them, provide that close security. But because we had those reports, meant there was probably an IED around. I didn't want to be right behind them, that if I hit it with the vehicle, I would throw shrapnel at the engineers. That would be a bad way for me to, deal with it. It was in a culvert. It was a large dip in the earth, and I thought they'd be relatively safer in there. I'd be better staying up here and providing that machine gun support in case they got into trouble. Anyway, they started their search. PJ gets out as an EDD, explosive detection dog. Macca jumped out, get PJ out, sends her on a search. Engineers start searching. I had Plummy in the right lane and Pup in the left lane, and Jonesy was supporting them. Swanee was the other engineer, but he stayed in the rear of the PMV on the machine gun to provide support because we didn't need to have all of us out there really. And he wasn't feeling all that crash shot anyway. We started, some of us was getting a bit crook out in the patrol for a little while. And we rolled down. He searched. He got to the other side. But when they were right down in the culvert, there was actually a part of the culvert that we'd actually built. The Americans and Australians teams had gone out there and built this culvert with concrete and stuff. And the engineers got down there, and as I was searching out, it was just this like picturesque photo. And I pulled my camera out and took a photo of it. And I was like, that's actually really cool. Snapped the photo. And I thought, well, I've got the camera out. I'll use the zoom and see if I can see anyone around. So I'm zooming around with my camera. And then they come on the radio and they say, all done, mate. I looked across. Look, no worries, they're all done. They gave me the thumbs up. They'd taken a knee on the other side of this big ditch. And I put the camera back in this Pelican case, kicked it behind my driver, Reese, whose nickname was Ned, and kicked it behind his seat. And I said, righto, Ned, let's go. And he just engaged the park brake. We started rolling down into it. Nothing had changed from the other IEDs we'd found. We'd found over 100 the other, normally. And I drove over the culvert and boom, up she went. And it wasn't a bang. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't fire. It was just this thud. And it was like a kind of like a suction sound. Like a whoo, kind of went off. And it was really weird to hear because obviously we had helmets on. I remember seeing the sun, and I knew it was about midday. I wasn't looking up. The vehicle was standing on its end, nearly on its bum, and then I blacked out. I don't know how long it was until I woke up, but I woke up and there was dust everywhere, mouth, nose, ears, everything was full of dust. I was laying face down in the back of my Bushmaster, and I tried yelling out to Reese. I said, Ned, you all right? I couldn't hear him. He was yelling at me. And I was kind of laying down. So I was laying down face down, but kind of with my arms crossed across my body like a mummy. And I couldn't move my arms. Like I was trying to get my arms out to go to like a push-up position and push up, but I couldn't move my arms. So I was trying to move my legs, and I couldn't move my legs. And I don't know if I just got into shock or what was going on. I couldn't move. And Ned was in his seat. He was in the driver's seat with his harness on. And he screamed out, "Are you all right?" And I said, "No, I'm not all right." And we had some smoke grenades that were sitting on the vent behind Reese where he could have grabbed them and thrown it out to let the others know that we weren't okay. But that had been blown off. All the stuff inside just became shrapnel, just got thrown around the inside of the PMV. And yeah, then I blacked out again. And the next thing I remember is the sound of the back door opening up, followed by like this pungent aroma of cigarette, like a rolly cigarette, tobacco. It was Port Royal, I think it was. The EOD tech, Dog was his name, Blue Dog. He was smoking rollies, and he'd gone to go put a C-spine collar on my neck, and it's like smelling salts. The smell of the tobacco just kind of like woke me up, and I was like, oh God, that's disgusting. And I woke up and I was like, "Is that you, Dog?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "You've just hit an IED." And I was like, "Oh, bad?" And he goes, "Mate, it was pretty big." And yeah, and that was it. And then from the next thing there, I was getting dragged out. I was on a spine board. I got laid down next to the Bravo call sign, which was Jeff. And he actually went through Kapuka and Armoured Corps training with my brother. So he knew my mum and dad. And, he comes down and he goes, "Mate, you scared the absolute shit out of me. Like, I thought I was trying to tell your mum and dad how you died." And I was like, "It's all good. I'm all right, man." By this time, I'd been given morphine, so I was feeling pretty good. Started yelling some obscenities at the Taliban. And then Jeff kind of kicked me because he was on the radio trying to call in the Black Hawk. And he kicked me and he said, "Oi, shut up." Then I was loaded up onto a US Army Black Hawk and flown back to triage at the at TK.
So what injuries had you sustained from the actual blast?
So externally, a laceration to the chin. That was it. I'd actually, that little scar on the bottom of my chin, 5 stitches on the bottom of my chin. I nick it every time I have a shave. That was it. That was externally. Internally, I'd actually done a lot of damage. I'd taken a substantive hit to the head, even with the Kevlar on, which caused me to have a traumatic brain injury. I had all my spine, so in my spine, all the discs in my back had essentially all been compressed so hard that they'd been desiccated or bulged or, just turned to mush in my back. So my back is in a lot of pain now. I'd also fractured I have 3 fractures in my cervical spine. I was very lucky to get away with the injuries that I got away with. And I'd gone into a state of shock, which would kind of almost paralyze me from the waist down. When I was out on the out of the vehicle, I could move my hands, but I was kind of strapped up onto the spine board. When I got on the helicopter, I remember furiously trying to wriggle my toes up and down, and I could not do it. I could not move my feet. It was just the most terrifying feeling of not being able to move my feet. And I didn't get to move my feet until a few hours later when I was put in a hospital bed in TK. That I actually got this god-awful pins and needles through my legs, and I got to wriggle my toes, and it was just the most unbelievable, painful, but like happy experience because I could move my feet again, But most of my injuries are all internal.
So what was it like once you'd been loaded on the chopper? What was the trip like back to TK? What do you remember of it?
I remember looking at the roof of a Black Hawk. I remember seeing the medic on the Black Hawk. And if anyone's ever been to Afghanistan, it's high altitude. You'd know that. And Afghanistan is quite high. And helicopters really struggle to fly in high altitude because it's just the air and that sort of stuff. And I'm no aeronautics engineer, but they struggle. They end up doing the really turbulent flights, like it really shakes. They fly quite well over there, but obviously. But they really have to kind of turn and burn pretty hard. And they shake violently, helicopters, when they're in that situation. This guy put a IV in my arm, and I remember looking down, kind of glancing with my eyes, like looking straight down, and I saw him, and like his arm and his hand, my arm and his hand were not in sync. They were moving separate ways. It was like, you're never going to get this needle into a vein in my arm in a helicopter, and you just first go plonk straight in. And I was like, that guy has done that way too many times. But from there, I remember Reese reaching over and kind of putting his hand on my chest, and he said, we're all going to be okay. It's all right. Don't worry. I remember blacking out again and kind of coming to as I was getting taken out of the helicopter by the multinational Australian, Singapore, American medical team. And the Singaporean dude nearly dropped me, and I nearly got dropped dead on the flight deck of the hospital. And then I was rolled straight into the triage. It was the helicopter ride was, for the first 5 minutes, was just the most god awful experience, not being able to feel my toes. But the other 25 minutes, I couldn't tell you what happened because I have no idea. Yeah, really. I was just in my own world. I was panicking, whatever was going on.
So what happens next? Like you go into, so you get back to TK, you go into triage, and what do you remember of this part of, what happened next?
So I remember going into the triage. I remember as we were getting wheeled up, someone said to me, it was a really weird thing to say. He said, I believe you're the 200th Australian soldier to be wounded in action. And I went, oh, okay, cool. No idea. The RSM was there, and he asked me where my pistol and my rifle was, to which I promptly replied with, I have no effing idea. I didn't know. I didn't really care.
I'm in pain, like.
Yeah. I was like, I didn't even have shoes on. That was the weird part. I didn't even have shoes on. I didn't know where anything was. And then I got wheeled into the triage, and there was a medic there that I'd known from in Townsville. She's a really, really nice person, Jackie, and she was working as part of the triage team. And I remember one of the key components of our medical training when we went through, and it was like, if there's ever someone who's got a suspected spinal injury, they're going to get what's called a priapism, which is the last erection they'll ever have. So here's me in this hospital who's just suffered a spinal injury, strapped to a spine board, hasn't felt my feet since I got on the helicopter, or before the helicopter ride, or flight back in. And I thought I was high on morphine. I thought I'd whispered to Jackie. I was like, hey, Jackie. She's like, yeah, mate. And I was like, do I have a boner? And she just kind of went, no, mate. And I was like, oh, cool. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't say that quietly at all. I yelled it out that everyone in that triage facility could hear it. And Yeah, I remember that. I remember getting the once over. They kind of cut all the clothes off me, and I was panicking. I remember someone walking in and saying, "Do you want us to contact your next of kin?" And I swore at this woman. I don't know who it was. I just swore. I was like, "Don't you dare," you know, because I could think of nothing worse than being my mum and having the phone ring and have someone say, "Hey, it's such and such from the Australian Defence Force." I was like, "Don't you dare." And yeah, so we went through the kind of triage side of it. I got a couple of injections in my back. I don't know what it was, something. And then I got wheeled into the ward, and I was in the ward. And that's where I kind of hung out there for a bit. So, yeah, it was pretty good. But yeah, it was a very interesting moment of going into the hospital, but one I don't think I'll forget. I think I made it a bit funny. It was a serious situation, but I think I made it funny. But once I got in the hospital, once they brought in what's called a Simpson pack, named after Simpson and his donkey. And the Simpson pack's essentially what they give wounded soldiers to wear because you just had all your clothes cut off you. So it's like a army shirt, army shorts, and a shaving kit. And I hadn't shaved because I'd been out on patrol for a little while. And I remember someone walking in and said, "Oh, the CO's coming to see you. You might want to have a shave." And I had a bandage around my head and blood all over my face, and I was like, okay, no worries. Yeah, and that's where I stayed in hospital for the remaining time before I was moved to Kandahar.
So, and tell me, so just next, because you had your traumatic brain injury, and then you weren't able to go back to do what you wanted, what you were trained to do. Explain that part to us.
That was the very gut-wrenching experience. So I couldn't pass the cognitive baseline test, which, thanks to myself and a few other blokes getting traumatic brain injuries, they brought in you had to do it before you went overseas after that. But prior to that, we actually didn't do any baseline testing. And it's just a card game. There's hearts, and there's red cards, and there's the black cards. And you just have to say which one's in the center. So as a card flips over, you just click a button that says red, black, red, black. And then they get reaction time, and they see this guy can cognitively operate within a certain parameter that's acceptable. And they give it to a lot of sports players that have concussions in the NFL and that sort of stuff. That's kind of where it all came from. And our doc that was there at the time, he was kind of proactive with it. I couldn't pass that test, and they gave me every 24 hours to see if I was getting any better at it. And I was not getting any better at it. So they were making the recommendations that I'd get sent to Kandahar, to the medical facility there, because they had neurosurgeons and that could address the issue to see whether or not I had a bleed on the brain or something that was more sinister that was stopping me from operating, and if my brain injury was going to get better or worse. Getting removed from my troop and platoon and the combat team was gut-wrenching. That was the worst feeling ever. You felt like you were abandoning your mates. It was horrible, especially as a leader. As a leader, you're not supposed to leave your men behind, sort of thing. You're supposed to get in with the ship. But I left them. That was it was a real gut wrenching thing. And I think a lot of my trauma that I got comes around two big components. One of it was the flight where I couldn't wriggle my toes, and the other one was leaving the blokes behind and not seeing out my last mission.
So for you, you've just mentioned that, and it's after you couldn't go back and fight anymore, had you lost your sense of purpose? Like, did you feel that you'd lost your sense of purpose? And I know you transferred into the Federation Guard. Was that still? Did you find your purpose again, or was it different? You just couldn't get back to what you'd loved doing prior to when you couldn't fight anymore.
I think losing purpose is probably a really simplified way of putting it. But yes, for most part, I did. I got back to Townsville. So I pretty much, my journey from there ended. I went to Kandahar. I spent a few weeks in Kandahar. Then I was medically returned home back to Australia. I landed in Townsville. There was no seeing your family. There was no great experience of seeing everyone welcome back in with the hugs and kisses and stuff. I was wheeled out in a wheelchair out of a side door of the Townsville airport straight to a medical transport to take me back to Laverack Barracks. And my mum was there, and the duty officer of B Squadron, 3rd 4th Cavalry was there as well. And they said, "Welcome home, mate." And one of the guys who went through IETs with my brother Scott, Luke, who was also in the same unit, he rocked up as well and was like, "Hey, mate, good to see you." So I had 3 people there that kind of came to see me. And it wasn't the great, welcome home sort of thing. It was not like that at all. And then because there were no neuropsychs or neurosurgeons in Townsville that were seeing new patients, the Army's like, we have to move you somewhere where you can go. Your options are Sydney or Canberra. And I was like, well, I know the Federation Guard's in Canberra. At least that's something I could do, I guess, because I'm an OR and there's not many, OR positions in Sydney. So I'll go to Canberra. And I went to Canberra and went to the Federation Guard, and going from being a combat soldier to 3 months later being a drill ceremony, all sort of stuff. It wasn't too bad, but it was a big change from what I was trying to do prior to that. And, like I said, I was trying to become special forces. I wanted to train to be that tip of the spear, but with a brain injury and a spinal injury, I was never going to be able to do that, I had a long road to go. I had a stutter at the time, and I had to learn how to speak properly again. I had to deal with a lot of my trauma that was going on. I was angry after the first trip. You should have seen me after the second trip. I was loony. I just did not get along with anybody. It was a very, very weird time in my life where I kind of didn't know what was happening. And, the Federation Guard gave me some level of purpose, not the purpose I was after. But I started to build some opportunities while I was there, which saw me, fortunate enough to be selected to go to France for doing services in Villers-Bretonneux. And that was...
What was that like for you? Was going to where the Anzac legend was born? What was that like?
You kind of put you back in your place. And I think, like I was saying a minute ago, I was very angry.
Because you'd contemplated suicide, hadn't you, at that point?
After this point, yeah. So after I got to Canberra, I actually was in... I was in a building and I looked over the edge of this building and decided, my blokes were still overseas. I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the team. I was no longer their leader. I was no longer their mate. I was back home sitting here on a cushy couch, drinking a rum and watching the footy on a Friday night, and they're over there busting a gut. And I knew I was supposed to be there, and it just kind of really got to me. And I ended up going too far down the rabbit warren with the alcohol and went out to the balcony, and I looked over the edge of this balcony, 15 floors down, I think it was. And I thought it'd just be easier. I climbed over the edge of the balcony and I looked down, and there were moments in time that kind of came back to me, all my family, my brothers, just growing up sort of stuff, and just all the mates that I made along the way. And it's like, you're going to let these people down, mate, and I climbed back over the edge and just sat on the balcony and cried and called up some people in the morning. I went to work and I marched across to the medical centre and said, I did something you wouldn't believe last night. Went through that process, and that was kind of a turning point for me, really. It was where I started the journey of mental health and dealing with my own demons and finding out what all the trauma was and how I dealt with it, and finding a sense of purpose that gave me something to want to be in Canberra for. And, being at the Federation Guard, having a stutter and hand-eye coordination, you'd see that drill is actually really good for that stuff. And I actually got really good at drill. And I was in the precision drill team, spinning rifles around and all that sort of ridiculous stuff. And got to meet some really good people that were down that area. And I was fortunate enough that when it came to the crunch, go to the War Memorial and stand amongst those names of people that never came home and honour them at the last post ceremony on a Wednesday night. You were like, this is why I'm here. I'm not here. It's not my journey. It's part of a bigger story, and it's, you kind of, you're part of a legacy now. You're a custodian of the traditions, and the name Anzac. And though a lot of us will never ever refer to ourselves as Anzacs, we bear their customs and traditions. And when I was told I was going to France for the dawn service in Villers-Bretonneux and in Belgium at the Menin Gate and stuff like that, that really kind of changed my perspective. And then we spent 2 weeks touring the battlefields of the Western Front prior to Anzac Day. And then I realised, like I said before, my problems are nothing compared to the problems of people in a different time period, not longer the bubble of the global theatre, but the time period. Some people had faced some tremendous hardships in 1915 to 1918, and then subsequently after the war, only for it to happen 20 years later again, and then for it to happen again. And, as the song goes, it all happened again and again and again. So yeah, going to the Western Front was probably a moment where I was like, your problems are nothing, mate. You've got your feet, you know. I got blown up by an IED that would have killed all 4 of the engineers and the dog had they stepped on it, and they were just lucky that they didn't, because Plummy is a tall fella and doesn't walk properly. He stepped over it, you know. And for me to hit it in an armoured vehicle that's 13.5 tonnes, to have a 2-inch scar on the bottom of my chin as my only physical injury, pretty lucky, pretty fortunate, you know.
Absolutely, and mate, it's why I do the podcast. You know, it's to get you guys on and share your experiences. And I recently just came back from the Western Front, and I had the honour of laying a reef at the Menin Gate for my family and the tour group that I was there with. But then I was, through the podcast, I interviewed the chairman of the Last Post Association, and he gave me the honour to close out the Last Post on one night. And then on my final night there, I had the honour of reciting the ode. And, mate, I can tell you now, it was one thing to lay a reef on behalf of my family and everyone, but to say the ode in front of 54,000 names to the missing, mate, that's something that will live with me forever. And like you're saying, it puts all your problems into, you know, like, that's 54,000 names to the missing of the men that never came home. And it's standing there, I was proud as punch to be an Australian, but I was proud in another sense of honouring these men that had gone and, like you said, experienced something of a different time. And it was something, and I know exactly what you mean. It's, you know, I know exactly, you and I have spoken off air, we're great mates, about the mental health issues and the struggles. I attempted suicide as well. That's why I'm such an advocate, as you are, in the mental health space. And so in 2014, Chris, you posted to ADFA as a leadership instructor, where you instructed none other than Dylan from Brothers and Books. What was that like, working with Dylan? And
that was good. I got posted, as you said, I got posted to the leadership and military skills section of the Australian Defence Force Academy in Canberra. Really interesting posting, a lot of development of junior officers and officer cadets and midshipmen from the academy. Obviously, they're there studying their academic phases as well, and they go through a leadership training continuum. And I was very fortunate to cross paths with many junior officers that are in the Defence Force now. But yeah, I did cross paths quite a bit with Dylan from Brothers and Books. And I can tell you one thing, it's an amazing journey to see what he has done since those days and what he was like back then to what he is now. And I know, Dylan's the first to admit he's a little bit of a rat bag every now and then, but to see the maturity and growth and professional development that he is now, it's awe-inspiring. It's absolutely, it's unreal to see how much he's developed. It's awesome.
yeah, the whole concept of turning something that into adversity, like he's done really well with what happened to him, and getting people behind the community of making reading fun again. It's and it is, mate. He's been able to do something that is amazing and talk about mental health, and we're both you and I are both advocates on mental health and our own struggles as well, and he is as well. And yeah, he's really done well in that, what he's done in that community, and the amount of people, it blows me away, the amount of people that are with him and, supporting him, and it's great to see. And I know you support him as well, and it's really, really good. And this is what it is, the veteran space. You can do some amazing things, but you've also seen, Chris, that there's been some, not so good things that veterans are, they're good at attacking each other in some sense. So, but in 2017, you became a instructor at Pucker, and then where your journey began, and you transitioned from full-time to reserves. Did you feel that you knew that your time in full-time was coming to an end?
Yeah. For a while there, so when I left Canberra and I was posted back to Puckapunyal, it was like a full circle moment, the place where I first started my journey in the Corps. I was now instructing people that were, getting off the bus from Kapuka that were brand new soldiers, and I was starting their journey in the Corps. And it was a very, very full circle moment. But at the same token, I'd kind of looked at the experiences that I had and the adversity that I'd faced and the challenges that I'd been through, and thought to myself, is this going to be my forever job? Is this going to be something that I'm going to stick with? And, you know, there were moments where, like I said, you know, I was training. I wanted to be that tip of the proverbial spear, and I wanted to train up for special forces. And then I was wounded. And when I was wounded and I was diagnosed with a brain injury and a spinal injury, that when I sat my medical, I was never eligible for parachuting, which took me out of the pool to do anything special forces related because of the shock loading on your spine. And then I thought, okay, well, I can't get into special forces that way. What could I do? And then I did a secondment, so to speak, to the Australian Army Intelligence, where I went and did that for a component, and then realised that that wasn't for me. And then I came back to my own corps, and I thought, how can I find the job that's going to suit my lifestyle now in the Defence Force, you know, because it's one military, but there's many, many jobs and roles you can fulfil. And I thought to myself, well, I wanted to be a pilot when I was in school that I never got the grades for. I definitely got the life experience now, and I've faced all these challenges. I'm sure I could go and apply to be a SSO pilot and go through the pilot program. And so I looked into that. It was all feasible. Got the recommendations, got the approvals, sat the board, did the medical. And the medical said not suitable for aviation medical due to my spinal injury, which was funny because it goes, you have to sit in an ejector seat. And I was like, well, helicopters don't have ejector seats, but obviously you go through BFTS and they have to go through the fixed wing program, and obviously therein lies the problem. You had to get into an ejector seat. And for me, that last no was just the massive kick in the guts that kind of made me realise maybe my wick of the candles run, you know, the flame's starting to die out. Do I still have the passion for soldiering that I had 10 years prior to? Do I still have something, or is there something out there that's better for me? And it was a long decision-making process, but I decided that I would transfer to the reserves, and I was going to go inactive reserves, and just, you know, go figure out what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be. And yeah, so I made that call, but you know, fate had a few other things in plan for me, and I ended up transferring to the active reserves after I received the Jonathan Church Ethical of the Soldier of the Year award. So, and
I mentioned that. So 2017 was a big year for you. You were nominated for Young Australian of the Year with your brother Scott for the work that you'd done in the veteran space with forming young veterans and the Jonathan Church Award. So can you just tell us a little bit about the Jonathan Church Award and what that is?
Yeah, so the Jonathan Church Ethical Soldier Award is named after Jonathan Church, who is he was a former SAS soldier who served in Rwanda. And he's actually seen, if you look up his name, he's actually the photo of an Australian soldier wearing a UN cap, carrying a local national in Rwanda and giving them assistance. And the idea behind the award is that it's every soldier is an expert in close combat. There's no one more expert in close combat than a special forces operator. But he's also got his weapon slung, and he's doing humanitarian work because that's the level of professionalism that we have in our army. And the award is named after him because it's for soldiers and officers that exemplify what it is to be an Australian soldier. You know, those basic tenets. Every soldier's an expert at their job, but every soldier's compassionate. And the award recipients are people that have done things outside of their rank, outside of their core role in trades in the military to provide assistance to someone else in need. And some of the recipients that I was there with had done amazing stuff. You know, I was nominated and received the award for my work in veteran suicide intervention that I was doing whilst I was working at Pucka. You know, some nights I was driving from Puckapunyal to Geelong and inner city Melbourne to provide assistance to veterans in need, and then I'd drive back to Puckapunyal and get up at 06, and I was out there running IETs around the parade ground doing, you know, crash action drills at 6:30. So I was pretty knackered through that year, but I did it because it was the right reasons, and that's why I received the award. And some of the other guys and girls that got the awards were people that had provided assistance during a car going in an accident, and they got out on their way home and provided assistance to those people, or mates that were in need. So that was a really, really profound experience to receive that award, and it was only a handful of us. I think there were 6 of us all up, and we went to the Chief of Army and met the Chief of Army at the time and the RSM Army, and we got to go to France for 3.5, 4 weeks, and do like battlefield history tours, visit the Musée de l'Armée, and then do the whole Western Front. Ironically, with the same mob that you did your tour with just recently. So it was a very small world, but yeah, an amazing experience. And we also went there with the idea that we actually would look at these scenarios of these historic battles, but we'd also try and apply modern battlefield tactics to see how different it would have been if these same battles were being fought today. So that was really interesting as well. But obviously we discussed a lot of the morals and ethics behind stuff as well with...
So, and I've just been over with a couple of Army veterans, and they just said, oh my God, like it blows their mind how the battles were fought then and now. And I would often, because I'm passionate about military history, as you know, I'd often ask them, I go, so what would you do now? And the thing, it'd be an all arms, like all arms, like, and just when we were at Fromell, one of my friends who's been on the podcast, she looked at the ground and just went, oh, this is just open slather. Like, this is just so flat. Fromell, flat as a pancake, open, exposed. And she said, oh, just the thought of what those guys did. And for you, it would have been fascinating to be like playing war games in your head, going, well, what would I do here? Where would the cav go? Where would this go? And yeah, would have been interesting.
Oh, it was really interesting in some of the aspects too. There were some places you'd look at and you'd go, you go to Le Hamel and you can see that the German trenches were on the reverse slope of the hill, and that was where the first combined arms assault happened, and they wouldn't have seen the tanks until the tanks were literally 15, 20 metres in front of them because of the situation, They really get you. It was really good to get the appreciation of it, but then you'd go to some of the museums where you'd see a portion of the ammunition expenditure lined up against a wall, and they're like, this here would have been fired in the space of 2 hours or 3 hours, which was just mind-boggling to know there was that much ordnance flying through the sky. And the situations they must have faced, like I said to you previously, makes your problems seem to be nothing, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. And when you walk in those cemeteries, mate, you can read the cost of a battle, you can read, you read unit diaries, and then you walk through those cemeteries, like you go to Tynecott where almost 12,000 Commonwealth soldiers are buried. You go to Villers-Bretonneux where, there's 11,000 names to the missing. And it's when you walk through those cemeteries, it's the true scale. Like you actually understand the scale. You see the headstones and you look and go, there's nearly 12,000 men that lie in this cemetery. Like it's just... That's what blows my mind all the time is when I walk those cemeteries, I'm like, wow. And then you read only son of Mr. and Mrs. Smith from, Ballarat in Victoria, and you just, as you said previously, it puts everything, your problems are small when, that's the only son, and they lost their only son, and he was off on the grand adventure. And like you said, when you went to Afghan, it was the grand adventure, this was your adventure, and yeah, it's a very special place, and I'm glad you got to experience it, and I've been lucky enough to experience it as well. And I think I say it all the time that I think every young Australian needs to go to the Gallipoli, go to the Western Front, and see what these, as you said, the Anzac legend was born from that. And you guys, as you said, earlier, that you're following on the tradition of the Anzac legend, and and that's what it is. And I suppose for you, and I'll ask you this, the Jonathan Church Award, of every accolade that you've got in the military, and is that your proudest award that you've received, just for what it represents, the award?
For the most part, yeah. It's something that it's not I got no commendation for it. It was a certificate that was handed to me, and it sits in a frame at home. There's no way of seeing that award on my uniform. So when I wear my uniform, I've got my service medals, I've got my combat badge and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But there's no way to represent that award on my uniform. It's only something I know. It's something that in my own being, I look at it and I go, I deserve that, you know. I did the hard yards, you know, and there was only a small bunch of us that receive it. Each year it's only received by a very, very, very select few people that are recommended by their hierarchy. And, you know, I'm very proud of that award, you know, and I think when I look at the accolades and achievements of my military service, that is one of the highlights. My other greatest highlight was when I was the catafalque party commander at the Australian War Memorial, when the RSMA and the Chief of Army read out the names of the soldiers that died in Afghanistan, and I was handpicked by my boss. He said, "You're going to run it because you've got the biggest sacrifice in Afghanistan. You know, Tutu was there. You've been to more ramp ceremonies than most." But also, he was there on my second trip, and he said to me, "You're probably the one that suited the most." He goes, "I can't do it because he's a captain." He goes, "It's got to be an NCO." And so I said, "I'd be more than honoured to." And the people that we selected to stand in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and stand on the forecourt of the War Memorial were all people that had served there. And I think, you know, doing the dawn service in Villers-Bretonneux in 2013 was unreal. But back here in our home, you know, that hallowed place where I was the commander, and there was the Governor General, there was the Prime Minister, the opposition leader. Not a word was spoken in the War Memorial when they were reading those names out. There were three voices. There was the Chief of Army and the RSM Army who would read the name rank of our fallen. And then there was my voice, which was the commander who was giving the order for present arms and rest on arms, you know, which was, they were listening to me because we were there representing every single serviceman and woman that had served in Afghanistan on Op Slipper and High Road. So those, you know, between the Jonathan Church and award and that day, again, you don't wear anything on your uniform that tells you you've done that. Those are both experiences that I hold very nearly and dearly to my heart. And, you know, they're probably more highlights of my service.
Absolutely. No, mate, a very, very special moment for you. And you mentioned that you started the journey to reserves and the candle was starting to, you know, the wick was starting to, the flame was starting to burn out. And you actually started going down a different road, and I mentioned the flame. You actually started to get into your current job now and a firefighter. What made you, was this a new purpose, or what made you look to being a fiery?
No idea. I actually, I left, when I left the army, I kind of applied for a few jobs, and, you know, I was someone that was, you know, through my Australian of the Year award, and some of the media stuff that I'd done, you'd be able to Google me very easily, and the very top of the topic I was talking about was my mental health journey and how that can help other people. And I had a lot of people knock me back for a myriad of jobs because they saw me as broken goods. You know, they say, you know, "Oh, we just can't risk taking on a veteran at this stage." And I was very vocal about that, how that kind of, you know, I said, it's nonsense. You know, we're really good workers, we're hard workers, we earn our keep. And I did believe that. Like, I didn't know why I was getting knocked back for the jobs. And at one point I had a spreadsheet, 200 jobs that I was knocked back for. Like 202 jobs. And it was like entry. I wasn't looking for like to be the CEO or the COO of a company. I was trying to get entry-level jobs because initially I'd gotten out and I kind of had that attitude. I'm worth more than I am because, you know, I was an NCO in the army in charge of millions of dollars of equipment in Afghanistan. What more responsibility could I have? And then very quickly, you know, the wind was taken out of my sails, and I realised, well, actually, no one, as my dad said years before, no one cares. And that really kind of deflated me a little bit. And then I come across one day, I just typed in this job and it popped up, and it's called Project Firefighter, which is a member of the Department of Environment, Water, Land Preservation, DELP, here in Victoria. And essentially, you only work for the summer season. So from the fire season in October through to roughly March, April, and then maybe their prescribed burning season, you would work as a firefighter as like a flow capacity, what do they call it, a surge capacity. I was like, oh yeah, no worries. And I applied for that, and I went to the interview. It wasn't a very high-paying job. It wasn't much in the way of, going to pay a mortgage, but it would be a good foot in the door. And I ended up applying for the job, and I said to them, I'm a hard worker. I enjoy, in a weird sense, I enjoy being in situations that makes me think strategically and tactically. Like, I've got to make a tactical decision now for a strategic purpose within the commander's intent. And they kind of really understood that I would, kind of mold into this job that's kind of, firefighting, as you're aware, is very strategic. You're making plans 3 or 4 days ahead and hoping the weather does the right thing. And it's no different to the battlefield. You're planning for an eventuation that the enemy has to shape into that. And you're trying to shape your events around the enemy, but you don't know what it's going to do. Yeah. And firefighting is exactly the same, man. Firefighting is your enemy, and the weather is the unknowns, and I ended up getting the job, and I absolutely loved it. I was in, I've gone from wearing a green uniform working in the bush and to wearing a green uniform and working in the bush. I was wearing green firefighting overalls and carrying a chainsaw and, getting into firefights with fire, and it was awesome. I loved it. And I did that for a few years. So I'd work the summer as a firefighter, and then in the winter I would, as it's referred to, I'd just super chock it, obviously reservists referred to as chocos or chocolate soldiers. I took that as I take it as a term of endearment. It was told to me by a couple of the blokes that I met in reserves. They said, embrace it. It's you wear it in your sleeve. And I did. And I really enjoyed my reserve work. And in winter I was working as a reservist almost at that full-time capacity. And I transferred very easily from full-time service training IETs, because my role as a reservist was to train reserve IETs in the exact same role. So for me, the transition was the same job, part-time. And so I do that in the winter. Summer, back to firefighting. And then on my third year, I thought, I really want to do this full-time. Like, I want to buy a house. I want to settle down. I want all that, family life, And I applied for a full-time role as a professional firefighter here in Melbourne, and my first attempt I got in, which was, I didn't realise until I got the job. Apparently that's very uncommon. And now I work as a full-time firefighter for Fire Rescue Victoria. And again, like, what a job. I get paid to ride fire trucks, every kid's dream. I think if you'd asked me in 27 when I joined up, would I be in the army for, would I be a warrant officer in the army? Would I be a lifer? I would have said, yeah, absolutely. I loved the army. It was my passion. But just the certain, events that had occurred from the 23rd of September, those events that occurred from that day kind of shaped me to where I am now. And I'm thankful for it, because I've got an amazing job. I've got an amazing wife, and, I managed to buy my own home, and, it's been a real journey.
From where you were after when you were told you couldn't fight anymore, and then your suicide attempt, and then finding purpose again, you constantly are throwing yourself into helping people with mental health, and that's how I came across you just on Instagram a couple of years ago, and then I've been lucky enough to meet you. And the thing I love about you, and you've become a great mate of mine, and the thing I love about you, mate, is you're just so humble. You're humble, and you're so approachable, which, and it's to any veteran, any first responder, that, you just want to help them. You just, and that, when you and I got connected, I just wanted to get you on the podcast because, mate, you are an inspiration. And you've, since the start of lockdown in COVID, you've managed to, for emergency service and mental health, you've raised $55,771. Mate, that's unbelievable. And the challenges that you do, what is it for you? What is it, giving you purpose again, or is it that someone says you can't do something and you just go out and prove them wrong? What is it, mate?
Something like that. I think it's something like people say you can't do, so I do. No, I like to put myself in situations. I think mental health is a process. It's a journey. And people go, you can be mentally burnt out, you can be physically burnt out, you can be mentally and physically burnt out. And if anyone has never gone through a mental health struggle or a journey, so to speak, it's easily relatable to exhaustion. And you and I both know that it's simple. Most of my challenges that I've done to raise money for mental health have been something physical, because it's the easiest way to talk to people about mental health. And I suppose, in 2020, so Melbourne started with the COVID and we had the lockdowns, and I was working at Richmond Fire Station in Melbourne. And I was working in Melbourne, mate. Melbourne is a bustling city, and on a Friday or Saturday night in Melbourne, there are thousands of people on the street. The MCG is roaring with people watching the footy that flood out into Richmond and then straight into the CBD. Fed Square is bustling. The streets, you'd be lucky to get a car through, let alone a fire truck with lights and sirens on, right? We were driving through the city at like 60 k's an hour in a fire truck, and there was not a single car on the road. It was eerie. And we, as firefighters, we started to burn out. My wife is a neonatal intensive care nurse, and her co-workers were being taken off the ward away from the babies to go work on ventilators for people in hospital. And I know there's a lot of people that all poo-poo the whole COVID thing, but the situation is that people down here, including people that were unable to work, just getting general anxiety, started to really suffer. And I had an opportunity. There's the event, the Melbourne Firefighter Stair Climb, and they normally used to climb, 28 floors of the Crown Metropole, and did it for first responder mental health. And a good mate of mine used to do it all the time, and he was really upset he couldn't do it. And I know it's something he loved doing. He's very passionate about it. He's done all of them. And they were doing it virtually. And I thought, well, here I am. I'm going to work every day. I've got a tower outside that's used for the high-angle rescue training that is 5 stories tall. Why don't I do it? So I jumped on Instagram and I thought, what's a physical challenge? Wearing firefighting PPC. Like, for anyone that doesn't know firefighting PPC, it's designed to let keep the heat out, but it also lets, all your metabolic heat, so your internal heat stays inside. So it gets hot. You sweat a lot in it. And I thought, what's a physical challenge? Well, I'll climb to the equivalent height of the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. I'll climb that wearing my gear and a breathing apparatus on my back. And I thought, that's good. And I think it was like 27 times I had to climb it. And I told the boss at work, I'm going to climb this for charity. Is that all right? And he's like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. He's like, do you, man. I'm not coming out. I'm going to go and watch the TV. No worries. So I went outside and I had a mate of mine that I went through recruits with, and I climbed it. And every step I took, he was behind me. And he was going, you can do it, mate, you can do it. I was gassed. Like, I was absolutely gassed at it. And, I got to the top and I posted it on social media. I ended up raising like $2,000, something like that. 2,700, I think it was. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, It's my little bit to go to a charity that helps mental health. And obviously being involved in the veteran mental health space for many, many years, the focus was purely veterans and their families. And like, as you said, there's a bit of a tall poppy syndrome, dog eat dog kind of world in the veteran community that can become really nasty. And to get a job, I had to disassociate myself from that veteran mental health space. And then once I was in the job, I realised, man, emergency services deal with a lot of stuff as well. My brother, who was in the army as well, he got out and became a Victoria Police member. And he was working on some pretty intense jobs in Vicpol. And he said to me one day, he goes, it's weird, man, because in the army, you train for years and you deploy for a period of months. In emergency services, you train for a few months, and every single time you get responded to an incident, it's like being deployed again. But you finish that job, and here, as a police officer in Melbourne, and anywhere, I suppose, you could go to a car accident with someone trapped and injured, and then once that job's closed off and they've been transported to hospital and the tow truck's taken the vehicle away, you could get responded to an attempted suicide. You could get responded to a domestic violence call. So within the space of one shift, you could deal with so much trauma. And that rung true to me because I was working as a firefighter, and that's what happened. We had the Eastern Freeway crash where 4 Victoria police officers lost their lives. Yeah. And there were blokes that I was working with that, that were president at that time, and they were hurting. Police were hurting. Ambos were being supplemented by Defence Force drivers because they were burnt out physically and mentally. So I said, I'm going to do this stair climb. And I did that. I raised $2,000 and I was pretty chuffed. I was like, not bad. I'm a pretty competitive guy. 2,000 is pretty good. I ended up coming like 4th on the total donation thing. Not that it's a competition, but I was like, got on the leaderboard. No worries. Good stuff. And then, no one saw that we were going to be in lockdown and continued for nearly 2 years. 12 months later, we're still in lockdown and I've got to do something again. I've got to better that. I've got to make a difference. We're hurting. People are hurting. Everyone is hurting. And it was, you could see it in people's eyes, We caught up with our friends on Zoom, and to catch up with people that you'd normally see once a week on Zoom was just heartbreaking. My now wife couldn't see her family, and she's really tight with her family, and she was in tears. Working as a nurse on a 12-hour plus shift, doing overtime, coming home and being told you can't go see your family. She was burnt out. And I thought, I've got to do something for this. So I hit up the local gym, which was shut. And I said, can I borrow your stair machine? And they said, yeah, what do you want it for? And I was like, I'm going to do a challenge. I'm going to try and do something ridiculous. I went and picked up my firefighting PPC from work. And when I was on my days off, I ended up climbing the height of Mount Everest on a stair machine over 17 and a half hours, which you followed that on Instagram, and I had stories going up. It was a massive effort. 17 and a half hours of climbing a stair machine in PPC, and I was knackered. I was absolutely knackered at the end of it. I could not tell you, but it's relatable to mental health. You get to a point where your body says, I can't do this anymore. And for those that have been through mental health struggles, you get... No, you get to a point where your brain goes, you can't do this anymore, and your brain tries to talk you out of it. You're not worthy, you're not capable, you're never going to make this. Yeah. And there's got to be a part of you, that resilient factor, that's got to say, shut up, I'm going to do it. And I think for me, being an extremely competitive person, that's how I deal with it. You don't tell me what to do, I tell me what to do. I'm the captain of this ship. Yeah. I got to, I think it was 16 hours in, 15 hours in, so I still had 2.5 hours to go, and I hit the wall. I hit it hard. I hit the wall so hard I did not know what was going to happen. And I had to try and figure out, and this is I finished at 2 a.m, so it would have been midnight. I still had people on Instagram watching me. They're like, you can do it, man. You can do it. I'm getting messages of support. And I was like, you know what? I can do it. Yeah. And I did it. And I finished it, and there was no accolades, there was no songs, there was no ceremony, there was no well done. It was not on not on the news because no one cared. But I managed to raise $21,000 for charity that went straight into providing mental health support and support to emergency responders that have been going through some absolute ringers and were taking time off work to settle themselves, that have been dealing with trauma in their life and trauma in their family. That was the start of it. And then obviously this year, coming out of the backside of the pandemic, I'd planned to do a big walk. I wanted to walk somewhere a long distance to get people to come along and walk with me. And, couldn't do it during the pandemic. March this year, I was like, we just do it. Let's just get it done. So I rocked up, down, and I walked 116K over 25 hours from Point Nepean all the way to Melbourne, just because I could. I raised $7,000 doing that, and again, there was a point where I hit, I walked through a thunderstorm ankle deep, and we had this weird storm front come through, and there was lightning coming around us. And I was like, just water. It's just lightning. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But I just kept walking, and, I got to the point where it was like 4 a.m, and you could turn back and you could see all of the lights from where I'd started. And my brain went, you've walked that. And then I turned around, and it was still a long distance to Melbourne. You could see the lights of Melbourne. And my brain went, you got to walk that. And I've gone, I don't think I can make this. But I made it. I got there.
No, you did, and it was like your feet were a bit sore afterwards, mate. But
I never seized up.
You did really well, and it's something that McQuilty Quirk said on his podcast earlier this year. Because when I said to him, I said, like you were blown up by an IED as well, like you, and he's in...
Coco got it a bit worse than I did.
Coco did get it a lot worse. You know, he's in 8 to 10 pain every day. And I said to him, mate, is there days that you want to give up? And he said, no, there is no day that I ever want to give the Taliban the satisfaction that they won. I win this. And he said, like you said, it comes from the inner fight. Like you've got to, and I know it too, that like from getting where I was, you know, with my suicide attempt at 22 to getting to the person that you know now, it's been a lot of hard work, but it's been a lot of inner fighting that has gone, hey, I'm the captain. Exactly what you said. I'm the captain of this ship, and the black dog's not going to win, you know. And that's why I strive for strength all the time. And it's the same for you. It's the inner fight. You want to fight and go, no, bugger this. Like, you're a soldier. First and foremost, you're a soldier. You're trained to fight. And, you know, same as a firefighter. Now you're a firefighter, you're trained to fight. You're trained to run into those, you know, into those burning buildings and put the flames out. That's what you train for, you know, and that's where the inner fight comes from. And I feel that's what's been for me is that it starts with the inner fight. You've got to want to fight. But I understand there's people that just cannot see the way out of the big black hole that once you slip into, it's like a game of snakes and ladders. You go up, you get good, and then you can catch. But you're in where your mental health is now, and I know where mine is. I can catch myself now. I know when I'm and the good days outweigh the bad days now. There's a lot more good days than there are bad days, and it's probably the same for you, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I've had some really good news in the past few weeks. You know, I've had some really good occurrences. I'm not without fault. I still have my bad days, as we all do. But you're right, the good days outweigh the bad days. And like Coco, I think you know, he's in a lot more pain. His injuries were a lot more severe than mine. But I've lived with a headache for nearly 10 years, and it's like migraines, and my brain hurts, and my eyes hurt. But my back's always... I got told by a doctor I have the spine of a 65-year-old, and you know, it's not nice to hear. But I'm always in pain with my back. But correct, I'm not going to let them win. I can't let them win, because like any mental health struggle or any struggle you go through, you've got to have the will to win and the will to fight. And a lot of the stuff that I've done with charities over the years, being young veterans in the veteran space or in the emergency services space, I've always said you've got to have a will to win and a desire to thrive, you know. And through my journey since I joined the Army, and even before that, you know, I've had some really good mentors in my footy clubs and coaches that kind of taught me some real valuable life lessons. But also through my military journey and my veteran health journey, I've met some amazing people. I have crossed paths with some most, you know, as have you, inspirational veterans that have done some inspirational things, and I look to those people to thrive and to strive. To be like them and to be a standard setter for those that are going through hard times. Because you're right, you can't just go up to someone and say, hey mate, you're struggling, get better. Yeah. You know, let's say someone's angry, don't be angry. It doesn't help the situation, it makes it worse. Sometimes you have to show them the way. And I've found in many a times, especially with people that are, for lack of a better word, stubborn with their own mental health, you've got to show them, you know. Don't lead them, don't follow them, don't push them, but show them the way and go, hey, I can do it, so can you, you know. And it's heartening sometimes to see people that are doing these fantastic things. And I know the people that you know and the people you've had on this podcast are people that I know as well. And that's how we know each other is you speak to one and they go, hey, have you spoken to this person? Have you spoken to this person? You know, Carly I've known since we crossed paths in Afghanistan in 2009. And when I did the young veterans trip from the southernmost point to the northernmost point of the mainland, one of my stops in Brisbane, Carly was there. And I presented her with a quilt of valour that was given to me here in Melbourne to try and help her with her healing and to see her journey. Unreal. Yeah. But then also, you know, people like Dylan Conway, Brothers in Books, fantastic bloke. I know what he was like. I know where he used to hang out at ADFA, and I was probably one of the few people that was an instructor. Because I was such a low rank at ADFA when everyone else is a sergeant above. I was the only corporal there, really, me and one other bloke. I used to speak to them, frankly, I used to speak to these guys And they'd say, "Oh, how you going, Corporal?" And I was like, "Just call me Chris, mate. Like, I'm going to call you sir one day. Like, let's not joke around about it, you know." And you'd speak to them and you'd say, "Hey, this is your start of your journey." And to see from that bloke that I know that used to sit behind the cafe, you know, when he should have been in class, sorry, Dylan, up to where he is now, and he's a captain in the Royal Australian Regiment, and the accolades he's achieved, and not only that, his education and development in Brothers and Books in his charitable organisation. I message him and I say, "Mate, you're an inspiration." And he writes back, you know, "Mate, I got it from you." It's, you know, full circle. It's really humbling to see. It's such a great thing. And I love that. But going back to that point of, I've met some fantastic people, and I wouldn't be able to stand here today and have this conversation with you unless I had some of the people that I've crossed paths with over the years who have been instrumental mentors, instrumental leaders, and people who have helped me be who I am and supported me in my journey. So, you know, that's, it kind of comes around. And I even know that I'm now in an emergency services role. I'm still in the Defence Force. I'm just I'm in my transitional role to whatever comes next, family life perhaps, whatever the journey goes, I don't know, but, it's all part of the great adventure, really.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you this question because I feel we've gone full circle, but I want to ask you this. If you could go back now and tell your 18-year-old self, with everything that's happened and the journey you've got to this point, would you change anything? And not at all?
Not at all. In a heartbeat. Never. If I could live this life again and I knew that everything that was going to play out from the day that I joined the Army on the 10th of April 2007 up to the moment that I'm standing in now, I would play it exactly the same. Because I am proud of who I am now. I'm proud of what I've achieved. I'm proud of what I've gone through.
And I guess the people you've met along the way as well.
And the people I've met along the way, the lives that I've impacted, their lives that have impacted me. If you were to say, go back in time and change one thing, that whole butterfly effect thing, I might not have joined the Army. I might not have gone overseas. It might have been the engineers that stepped on the IED, and I might have been attending 4 funerals. The what ifs that are going to occur, I wouldn't want anything to change, because I was extremely fortunate, to live the life that I've lived, and the people that I've met along the way, the challenges, the adversities and stuff, have made me who I am. And I need to, this isn't the end of my journey. I'm only 33 this year, so I've still got a little while to go, I think. And I have more to give and more to offer, and I always will. But I wouldn't be able to do that had I not lived this life. So if, people say to me, would you change anything? Not at all. Would you go back to Afghanistan if you had to, in a heartbeat? Because it's about the people that I was there with. It's not about the fighting. And if there's people that, there are people out there that warmonger, and they kind of, you got to go over there and you got to... No, it's not about that. You've got to look at something like the way that Jonathan Church did. You're an expert in close combat. You're a soldier. You're a professional. You're in the profession of arms, but you're also a human being, and you're compassionate, and we provide humanitarian assistance. We are experts in providing assistance and care, whether it be on the foreign front or here in Australia. And we are accountable as the Defence Force, and we are Australians, and we are from diverse backgrounds and diverse cultures, and we need to embrace that. And I'm very proud of the journey and everything that's happened and how it's all gone, and I would 100% do it again.
So you mentioned going into the future and with your wife, and what are your plans, mate, going forward? What's next for Chris May? What do we got? What can we see?
My new adventure is fatherhood, actually. So
congratulations, mate. Well done.
Yeah, we're going to have a baby, and I suppose that is more terrifying than running into a burning building, and more terrifying than going to war is I'm going to have to develop a new set of skills and become a dad, It's something that, I was literally on the way here today. I was listening to a podcast about how dad's dad, and I was like, man, I really got to pick up on a few things here, And yeah, that's my next big challenge. And, where my wife and I are currently looking at buying our, family home that we're going to start to develop into our future role. But as for that, that's, family life's my next big challenge. So I'll probably have to put the brakes on a few things here and there. But I'm also looking towards, what's next. I'm always looking for that what's next things. I've got a few things up my sleeve, and I know Carly wants to come on one of them with me.
And you might be doing something with me next year, so we'll
Yeah, look, I've got to actually. There's two of my bucket list things. Yeah. So that what you've got planned, and then what I've got planned that Carly wants to get in on. They're two of my bucket list items that I want to do. I know that my body is starting to slow down. I'm getting a little bit older. My back is hurting a lot more, so some of these physical challenges might have to biannually or something like that. I might have to look after myself. And I'm working in a job where there is a lot of development and progression, not just as an operational firefighter, but also in the leadership roles, and then there's also day work roles and specialist skills. Training. So yeah, and training and whatnot. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities for me there, but yeah, I guess I'll just have to write it out, man. I think that's the best thing. I think the fear of unknowing is doing my head in. I'm a very strategic thinker. I like to have plans in place, man. I'm very military thinking. I've been here since I was 16, 16 years old, and I was getting told to think a certain way and have plans and contingency plans and backup plans and all the other nonsense, right? And now I'm at the whim of, what's going to happen next. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm looking forward to it, but I have no idea what's coming around the corner for me.
Mate, I think you're going to thrive in being a dad. You'll just smash it like you always do in everything every challenge and everything you've ever done. And mate, there's a quote that I want to finish your story. So Chris, your story is one of true grit and determination and never giving in, and I believe you inspire so many, mate. You inspire me, and to keep fighting, brother. And I call you brother. I really, I'm look to you for inspiration. You're just one of those guys that is just so inspirational. And I want to finish with a quote that I really believe sums you up. It always seems impossible until it's done, mate. That's by Nelson Mandela. And you every challenge that you ever face, everything, you do, you just achieve it. And, it's just, mate, I take my hat off to you. You're an absolute bloody inspiration. And for what I want to say next is thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for what you do as now Fiery. And thank you so much for, being such an inspiration to those who are struggling with mental health, mate. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue History, and I thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you very much for having me, and hope to catch up again, mate, and let's see what next year brings, hey?
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And if you feel like supporting us, you can now via our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/True Blue History, or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/True Blue History, and check out our new website, truebluehistory.com, for more great content.